People who step away from work at 55 do not simply end up 10 years behind those who retire at 65. They end up carrying a portfolio roughly $1 million lighter, a healthcare expense that can consume 66% of what they can safely withdraw each year, and a Social Security payment permanently locked at 70% of its potential maximum. All three of those consequences arrive at the same time, and virtually every retirement calculator you have ever used only accounts for one of them. The median savings for Americans between the ages of 55 and 64 sits at $185,000, according to the Federal Reserve's 2022 survey of consumer finances. Those who make it to the 65 to 74 age bracket have a median of $200,000. Both of those figures fall dramatically short of the $1.46 million that Americans believe they need to retire comfortably in 2026. That represents a $15,000 median gap for a 10-year difference in retirement timing. On the surface, that almost sounds manageable. It is not, because that number completely conceals the real issue. The median tells you what the middle of the distribution looks like, but the arithmetic, the actual compounding mathematics of what 10 additional working years does to a portfolio during its most powerful decade, tells an entirely different story. And it is one the financial industry has very little motivation to explain to you in plain terms. Today, the goal is to walk you through three forces that strike early retirees at the same time. Most people only ever model one of them. The third one, the most damaging of the three, almost never surfaces in the standard conversation about leaving work early. There is a specific reason for that, and we will get to it. But before any of that, there is a central idea worth introducing early because it will make everything that follows easier to absorb. Think of your working life as a harvest cycle. You plant in your 20s, you tend in your 30s, you grow in your 40s. And the harvest, the period of maximum yield, occurs during your mid-50s through your early 60s. That is when your portfolio is at its largest, when compounding is operating at its highest velocity, when peak earnings allow maximum contributions, when every dollar you add sits on top of a mountain of accumulated prior growth. Retire at 55 and you walk away from the field before the harvest arrives. The crops are standing right there, you simply abandon them. You do not retire from the harvest, you retire after it. Hold on to that framework. It will carry a great deal of weight as this continues. In a few minutes, something will be revealed about who actually retires early in America that will likely reframe everything you currently believe about this subject. But first, let us work through the math that almost nobody does. Start with a very specific number, $500,000 saved by age 55. That is a genuine accomplishment. You are comfortably ahead of the median. You have been disciplined and consistent. You feel as though you have earned the exit. The relevant detail here is that your mid-50s represent your peak earning years. Federal Reserve data shows that incomes typically reach their maximum between ages 45 and 54, which means you are positioned to make serious headway on retirement accounts. That is actually the central irony. Your peak earning years and your most powerful compounding years overlap almost perfectly between 55 and 65. Retire at 55 and you abandon both simultaneously. Here is the math. $500,000 at a 7% average annual return, with continued maximum 401k contributions of $23,500 per year, which was the 2025 limit for 401k and 403b plans. Over 10 years, with no market timing and no extraordinary strategy, your portfolio at age 65 reaches approximately $1,300,000. Not double your starting balance. 2.5 times it, because in those final 10 years, your $500,000 base is generating $35,000 annually in investment returns before you add a single new contribution. The compounding has finally caught its own momentum. Retire at 55 instead. You draw down 4% of $500,000, which equals $20,000 per year, or $1,667 per month from your savings, before taxes and before healthcare. You went from a projected $1.3 million to $500,000. And you went from being positioned to draw $52,000 annually to drawing $20,000 for the privilege of leaving 10 years ahead of schedule. That is the first force. You stop accumulating and begin depleting, the switchover. But the problem is not simply stopping the accumulation. The problem is what waits for you on the other side of that transition. The moment you leave your employer, healthcare arrives. You are 55 years old. Medicare does not begin until 65. That is a 10-year window during which you are entirely on your own for health insurance, whether through the private market, an ACA exchange plan, or COBRA coverage for the initial 18 months. Health insurance represents one of the largest expenses facing individuals who retire before 65, with monthly premiums running roughly $1,000 to $1,100 per person, meaningfully affecting how long retirement savings last. And as of the end of 2025, the enhanced ACA subsidies that helped millions of early retirees manage premium costs have expired. Many people previously qualified for assistance paying ACA premiums based on household income, but those subsidies are gone. Full price for 10 years. Paying approximately $12,000 to $13,000 per year in premiums per person can consume a substantial portion of annual retirement income, particularly for households relying on portfolio withdrawals. Over a decade, that represents a minimum of $132,000 in premiums alone. Add deductibles, co-payments, and out-of-pocket expenses, and you are realistically looking at $150,000 in total healthcare spending before Medicare finally begins. On a $20,000 annual portfolio withdrawal, $13,200 disappears into healthcare premiums in year one alone. You have $6,800 remaining for everything else. That is $566 per month. That is not a retirement. That is financial survival mode. The harvest metaphor earns its keep right here. You left the field early and now the frost moves in, and the frost costs $1,200 per month, every single month for a decade, simply to keep yourself insured in a country where going without coverage while drawing down savings is not a rational option for anyone. This is the point where someone always responds by saying that a real early retiree saves far more than $500,000 by 55 and plans ahead for healthcare costs. And some of them do. Approximately 40% of early retirees, according to the Employee Benefit Research Institute, left the workforce early because they were genuinely prepared. Roughly 2 out of 5 of those who retired early did so from a position of financial readiness. However, that group represents a minority compared to those whose circumstances forced an earlier exit than intended, which means 60% left early without being truly prepared. And the figure that explains that 60% is the one that should make you stop and pay close attention. Stay with this. The next part changes the entire frame. A study conducted by the Employee Benefit Research Institute found that 58% of retirees exit the workforce earlier than they originally planned, frequently due to factors entirely beyond their control. Not slightly earlier. On average, approximately 5 years separates what Americans plan and what actually happens. Non-retirees target age 66 as their retirement date. Most actually retire at 61. That gap is driven primarily by unplanned departures. The 2026 EBRI Retirement Confidence Survey breaks this down further. Among those who retired earlier than intended, 41% cited a health problem or disability, up from 31% in 2025. Corporate changes, including downsizing, business closures, and organizational restructuring, accounted for 35% of early retirements. Circumstances entirely outside the individual worker's control were responsible for 76% of all unplanned early retirements in 2025. 3 out of every 4 people who retire early did not plan to do so. A 2018 Urban Institute analysis of full-time workers in their early 50s found that 2 out of every 3 eventually left their positions involuntarily, with 56% citing employer-related reasons such as layoffs or business closures. Now it is worth pausing to name the reversal explicitly. The assumption is that the problem is that people who retire at 55 simply did not save enough. The actual problem is that most of those people never intended to retire at 55 at all. They were pushed out, and they had not constructed the financial architecture necessary to survive a scenario they had told themselves would never happen to them. This is why early retirees carry smaller portfolios than late retirees, not because they lack discipline, but because 2 out of 3 of them lost 10 years of peak earning, peak contributing, and peak compounding time to an involuntary exit and had modeled precisely 0 months of that possibility into their financial plan. And when a health event or a corporate reorganization hits you at 54 with $400,000 saved and no healthcare bridge strategy, you do not fail suddenly. You fail gradually. One healthcare premium at a time, 1 month of reduced portfolio withdrawal at a time, until the math quietly closes in on you in your early 70s and you are trying to figure out what to eliminate next. There is a specific pattern that emerges from this. Call it the 3-gear failure. Gear 1. The forced exit arrives 5 to 10 years before the planned exit. Gear 2. The early retiree begins drawing down a portfolio that was sized for a later retirement using the 4% rule, without recognizing that the portfolio now needs to sustain 40 years rather than 30. Gear 3. Healthcare costs that the retirement calculator never once asked about drain the first entire decade of what little financial runway remains. You do not need all 3 gears spinning to have a serious problem. But for most forced exit early retirees, all 3 are turning simultaneously. Having managed personal investments for over a decade, surrounded by accountants and financial attorneys who taught what money actually does in practice, the most costly conversation, not in fees but in the realization of what it costs to lack the information, is the one about what unfolds when the exit is not voluntary. Here is the distinction that separates the people who navigate a forced early exit successfully from those who do not. Knowing these numbers and building an actual system around them are 2 fundamentally different things. The data can be available for years. The system is what converts data into outcomes. There is a digital resource called the Exit Code. 8 chapters of retirement data distilled into a specific mathematical framework designed for anyone planning to leave the workforce in the next 5 to 15 years. 2 components of it connect directly to everything covered here. First, the 58% rule. Since 58% of retirees leave earlier than planned, a stress test model was built for people currently targeting age 65 who need to survive financially if they are pushed out at 60. Not because that will necessarily happen, but because the data indicates the probability is meaningful, and the people who emerge intact from that scenario built the buffer before they needed it, not after. Second, the $14,000 invisible bill. That is the annualized healthcare gap hitting retirees under 65, adjusted by income and state of residence. Not a rounding error, a dedicated line item that requires its own separate fund before any other calculation about retirement timing can be made accurately. The exit code is available through the link in the description for less than the cost of a single dinner out. It is built on 50 years of actual retirement data, not opinion or speculation. For anyone between 35 and 54 who is serious about this subject, the time invested in it will return meaningful value in the very first year of retirement. Let us keep moving. 3 forces were promised. 2 have been covered. The third is the one nobody wants to discuss openly because it involves a decision most people make emotionally rather than mathematically, and the financial industry has no structural incentive to correct that behavior. Social Security data shows that in 2019, 51% of Americans retired at age 61 or earlier, and 23% retired between 62 and 64, before Medicare eligibility begins at 65. Most of those individuals, the majority of them, claimed Social Security benefits the moment they became eligible at 62. The Social Security Administration permanently reduces benefits by 30% for people who claim at 62, meaning they receive 70% of their full retirement benefit every month for the remainder of their lives. That is not a temporary reduction. It is not a penalty that gets reversed over time. It is a permanent mathematical reduction applied to your monthly income for every year you live past 62. For someone with a full retirement age of 67 and a primary insurance amount of $2,000 per month, claiming at 62 produces approximately $1,400 per month. Claiming at 70 produces approximately $2,480 per month. A 77% difference in monthly income for an identical earnings history. $1,080 more per month for the rest of your life simply by waiting 8 years. Over 20 years, which is roughly the planning horizon for someone entering their late 60s in reasonable health, that difference accumulates to $259,200. Locked away, permanently gone, because a government website had a button and the check arrived. For each year benefits are delayed past full retirement age, monthly payments increase by approximately 8% up to age 70. Once benefits begin, the payment amount is fixed for life, aside from annual cost of living adjustments. 8% guaranteed per year with zero volatility and zero fees. No manager collecting a percentage off the top. Waiting beyond full retirement age increases your benefit by approximately 8% per year until age 70. Delaying until 70 can increase monthly Social Security payments by up to 24% compared to claiming at full retirement age. With multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars invested and years spent reading about asset allocation, manager selection, factor tilts, and tax efficiency, there is no hesitation in stating this clearly. There is no investment available to a regular American that offers an 8% guaranteed annual return on a no-fee, zero volatility basis. The Social Security delay is the single best risk-adjusted financial decision available in personal finance. And it receives almost no mainstream coverage because no financial professional earns a commission on it. Consider that incentive structure for a moment. You do not retire from the harvest. You retire after it. The Social Security timing decision is the final row in the field. Leave before it is complete and you forfeit the most valuable portion of the crop. Now, something has been building toward a specific point, and it deserves to be named directly. The three forces described here, the compounding cliff, the healthcare bridge gap, and the Social Security timing penalty, are not three separate and independent problems. They are one synchronized system that activates the moment you leave work before 65. And what makes the system so destructive is that each force magnifies the damage of the others. Retire early without a healthcare bridge, and you begin liquidating your portfolio to cover premiums, which reduces the base on which compound interest operates. Reduce that base and your 4% rule is working off a smaller number, which means less income. Less income from the portfolio creates greater pressure to claim Social Security early to fill the shortfall. Claim Social Security early and you lock in the permanent 30% reduction that follows you for every remaining year of your life. Every force accelerates the damage done by the others. This is why the 40-year retirement is categorically different from the 30-year retirement, and why the 4% rule was never designed to handle it. The real challenge is not eliminating all risk, but achieving a sensible equilibrium between protecting your portfolio from a major market decline and ensuring it grows sufficiently to keep pace with rising living costs. The well-known 4% rule was originally derived from the problem of sequence risk, a rigorous stress test running a simple withdrawal strategy against some of the most severe market environments in American history. It was designed and validated against historical 30-year windows. Retire at 55 and live to 95, and you need a 40-year window. The mathematics degrade significantly. Research has found that approximately 3.9% represents the highest defensible starting withdrawal rate for new retirees, assuming a portfolio of 40% stocks and 60% bonds, a 30-year time horizon, and a 90% probability of not exhausting funds. For a 40-year window, the safe rate needs to drop further still. A rate of 3% is a defensible target. 3% of $500,000 equals $15,000 per year. $1,250 per month. Subtract healthcare at $1,100 per month. You have $150 remaining for food, housing, transportation, utilities, and the remainder of adult life. That sounds absurd. It is absurd. And yet this is precisely the arithmetic confronting a forced exit early retiree with median savings and no pre-Medicare healthcare bridge who is attempting to follow the rules that conventional financial wisdom handed them. Sequence of returns risk means that even if your average portfolio returns are acceptable across your full retirement period, you can still deplete your savings entirely if the market performs poorly at the beginning of your retirement, because you are withdrawing funds from the portfolio at the same time it is losing value. The most dangerous threat to any withdrawal strategy is not a poor average return over 30 years. It is a significant market decline in the first 5 years of retirement. If your portfolio drops 40% in year 2 and you continue withdrawing the same dollar amount, you are liquidating a much larger percentage of a much smaller portfolio. The 40-year early retirement doubles your exposure window to this exact risk. You have more early years during which a damaging sequence of returns can permanently impair a portfolio that would have otherwise remained intact. Running into a severe market crash in year 3 of an early retirement is not simply bad luck. It is potentially a path to insolvency. Now the subplot that has been developing throughout reaches its resolution. Consider a 54-year-old engineer who was restructured out of his position when he had $400,000 saved and a target retirement age of 65. He burned through $36,000 during an 18-month job search. He eventually took contract work at 60% of his prior salary, but he did not stop there. Here is what he did that actually mattered. He did not claim Social Security at 62. He accepted a contract project at 63, lower pay and no employer benefits, but sufficient income to cover his living expenses without touching his investment portfolio. He deferred Social Security until 64. Not ideal. He still accepted a partial permanent reduction, but not 62. He enrolled in Medicare at 65. His contract income allowed him to leave his portfolio largely untouched from age 58 through 65. At 65, he carried approximately $460,000. His Social Security benefit at 64 was roughly $1,750 per month, rather than the approximately $2,300 he would have received at full retirement, age of 67. He forfeited around $550 per month for life. Over 20 years, that represents $132,000 in lost lifetime income. A real and meaningful cost, but he survived the forced exit with a functioning portfolio, a Medicare card, and a livable income. Because he made one critical and non-obvious decision in the middle of a chaotic situation. He treated Social Security as a financial instrument rather than a relief valve. He delayed claiming it as long as he practically could, while finding alternative ways to cover his costs. That is not a fairy tale outcome. He will have less in retirement than if he had worked through to 65 as originally planned. His harvest was interrupted, but he gathered enough of it to carry him forward. Most people in his situation do not manage that. Most people in his situation claim Social Security at 62 because the money is available and the need is immediate. They exhaust the flexibility in their entire financial system in year 1. They spend the following 20 years managing the consequences of that single decision. Here is a brief aside that captures the absurdity of how this typically plays out. Somewhere right now, someone has just received a severance package and is working through a checklist on the Social Security Administration website. The website is clean and professionally designed. The colors are welcoming. The button reads, "Apply now." And that person is thinking, finally some income coming in. They are about to permanently reduce every Social Security check they will receive for the rest of their natural life by 30%. And the website does not display that information prominently at the top of the page in large, unmissable letters. That is a notable design choice. Let us now build a concrete case study in actual dollar terms so everything lands at a real-world level. 2 brothers. Identical salary histories. Same employer. Same 401k match. Same everything through age 55. The first brother retires at 55. He has $450,000 saved. He is exhausted, burned out, and committed to his decision. He cannot claim Social Security at 55. He understands the earliest eligibility is 62. He purchases individual marketplace insurance at $1,050 per month. He withdraws 4% of his portfolio in year 1, which equals $18,000. His net available income after premiums, $5,400 per year, or $450 per month. He begins supplementing from principal almost immediately. By age 60, his portfolio has barely grown because the 4% withdrawal and healthcare costs have essentially neutralized any investment returns. At 62, he claims Social Security at approximately $1,500 per month, reflecting the current average benefit reduced by 30%. His portfolio at 62 sits somewhere around $380,000 after 7 years of withdrawals and healthcare expenses. He now has roughly $1,500 from Social Security and approximately $1,260 from a 3% portfolio withdrawal on $380,000. Total monthly income at 62, approximately $2,760 before taxes, with Medicare still 3 years away. The second brother works until 65. Same starting balance of $450,000 at 55. He contributes $23,500 per year for 10 additional years. At a 7% average annual return, he arrives at 65 with approximately $1,100,000. He is on Medicare from day one, with a Part B premium of roughly $174 per month. He claims Social Security at 67, his full retirement age, and receives approximately $2,710 per month. He withdraws 4% of $1,100,000, generating $44,000 per year. His total annual income is roughly $69,000. After Medicare, the income gap between the first brother at age 65 and the second brother at age 65 is approximately $48,000 per year. Every year, in the second brother's favor. Same starting money, same number of working years between 25 and 55. 10 different years between 55 and 65. The harvest. The first brother left before it was complete. The second stayed through it. Now, here is what to do with all of this. 3 specific actions, not generic advice. 3 things calibrated precisely to everything covered here.